They stepped into the octagon as warriors, but left as cautionary tales. Some were legends, some were rising stars, and some never came back. This is the dark side of the UFC, where one bad choice can cost you your career. Today, we're counting down the fighters who didn't just lose a fight, they got banned. Jon Jones. Without question, one of the most talented fighters MMA has ever seen. A man who redefined what was possible inside the UFC's light heavyweight division. His skill set was unmatched. Lightning-fast strikes, devastating ground and pound, and an uncanny ability to control fights. From his UFC debut at just 21 years old, Jones quickly rose, making legends look like amateurs. He captured the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship and defended it multiple times, setting records and creating highlight reel moments that still leave fans speechless. But outside the cage, Jon Jones' life was riddled with chaos. In 2012, Jones was arrested for a DUI, the first sign of trouble brewing beyond the octagon. Then came the infamous 2015 hit and run. Jones crashed his rental car into a pregnant woman's vehicle and fled the scene, an incident that rocked the MMA community. Jones pleaded guilty to leaving the scene of an accident, receiving a year's probation and community service. But the damage to his reputation was done. On top of legal troubles, Jones repeatedly ran afoul of USADA, the UFC's anti-doping agency. In 2016, he tested positive for cocaine metabolites, a substance he admitted using recreationally. Despite the setback, he returned to the cage only to be flagged again for banned substances, including turinabol, an anabolic steroid linked to enhanced performance and muscle recovery. These suspensions led to him being stripped of titles, losing his standing in the sport, and costing him years at the top, a crucial time that could have been used to solidify his legacy. Yet each time he returned from suspension, Jones' dominance inside the octagon silenced critics. His skill level remained undeniable, as he continued to defeat top contenders with precision and power. But behind the scenes, the battle wasn't just with other fighters, it was a relentless struggle with his own choices and demons. Jon Jones' story is one of immense talent overshadowed by controversy. A fighter who has faced the darkest moments, yet somehow remains in the GOAT conversation. Paul Semtex Daly, one of the most dangerous strikers to ever step inside the cage. Known for his explosive knockout power and relentless aggression, Daly has been a fan favorite for years. But behind those highlight reel finishes lies a career filled with controversy and missed opportunities. Daly started out in the UK's regional scene, quickly making a name for himself with precise boxing and devastating leg kicks. When Daly connected, the lights often went out, earning him the nickname Semtex for his explosive power. It wasn't long before the UFC came knocking. His UFC debut was unforgettable, but not for the right reasons. After a stunning knockout victory over Josh Koscheck, Daly shocked the MMA world by throwing a sucker punch after the final bell, a serious breach of sportsmanship that earned him a lifetime UFC ban. Despite this setback, Daly refused to fade away. He bounced back in Strikeforce, Bellator, and other promotions, racking up highlight reel knockouts and proving his power remained undeniable. But Daly's career wasn't without more hurdles. Multiple failed drug tests and clashes with promotions kept him in the headlines, sometimes for the wrong reasons. Still, his talent inside the cage remained undeniable. Rousimar Palhares, a name that strikes fear into the hearts of opponents and fans alike. Known for his iron grip and terrifying leg locks, Palhares carved a reputation as one of the most dangerous submission specialists in MMA history. But his career was as controversial as his chokeholds were relentless. Starting his journey in Brazil, Palhares quickly gained attention for his aggressive grappling and brutal submission style. With a background in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, his ability to lock in heel hooks and knee bars was unmatched, making him a nightmare for anyone who dared stand toe-to-toe on the mat. Palhares' UFC run was marked by spectacular submission finishes. His leg locks were so feared that opponents often fought just to avoid getting tangled in his deadly grips. But Palhares' aggressive style sometimes crossed the line. Repeatedly, Palhares was caught holding submissions long after opponents tapped or lost consciousness. Actions that earned him multiple warnings, suspensions, and ultimately his release from the UFC. His refusal to let go led to serious injuries and intense backlash. Two fights stand out in particular. At UFC Fight Night 29, Palhares submitted Mike Pierce with a brutal heel hook, but held the submission well past the tap, causing visible injury and forcing the referee to intervene late. Then, at UFC 162, Palhares locked in another heel hook on Jake Shields, this time holding it so long that Shields suffered torn ligaments, ending his career. These dangerous actions didn't go unnoticed. Palhares was fined and suspended multiple times by the UFC and athletic commissions. His reputation as a dangerous, reckless grappler followed him, eventually leading to his release from the UFC in 2013 after he held a submission too long during a fight with John Fitch. Many fighters called Palhares' behavior unsportsmanlike and reckless, emphasizing the sacred trust in MMA that submissions must be released immediately to protect fighters' safety. Referees and commissions reinforced the rules, but Palhares' stubborn grip and aggression kept stirring controversy. Jason Hyde. Jason Hyde is a fighter who's built a reputation on grit, heart, and relentless pressure. A former NCAA Division I wrestler, Hyde brought that wrestling pedigree into MMA with impressive skill and toughness. Known for his grinding style, he constantly pushes the pace, wearing opponents down with powerful strikes and heavy top control. Jason first made a name for himself in Strikeforce, where he showcased his wrestling dominance combined with steady improvement in striking and submissions. His transition to the UFC further proved his toughness, taking on some of the toughest names in the welterweight division. June 7, 2014, UFC Fight Night 42. Jason Hyde steps into the Octagon to face a rising star, Rafael dos Anjos, a high-stakes matchup for both men. But it didn't go Hyde's way. Dos Anjos, known for his relentless pressure and striking, secured a TKO victory in the second round. Tensions were already running high, the heat of competition pushing every emotion to the limit. As the referee moved in to wave the fight off, Jason Hyde did something no fighter should. He shoved the official. Not a light tap or accidental bump, but a clear, frustrated shove. In mixed martial arts, respect for the referee is sacred. Crossing that line means consequences, and Dana White made his stance crystal clear. By the very next day, Jason Hyde was cut from the UFC roster. No warnings, no suspensions, no second chances. For a fighter who had once shown promise and toughness inside the cage, this moment marked a sudden, harsh end to his UFC career. After being released, Hyde continued competing in smaller organizations, working to rebuild his name outside the biggest stage. But the stigma of that shove stayed with him. Jonathan Koppenhaver, better known as War Machine, was a fierce competitor in MMA. With an aggressive style and undeniable heart, he climbed the ranks in organizations like Bellator and the UFC, earning respect for his skill and toughness inside the cage. But behind the scenes, a darker side was brewing. Koppenhaver's personal life was troubled, marked by anger and violent tendencies that would soon erupt into tragedy. In August 2014, War Machine's life took a horrifying turn. He viciously attacked his then-girlfriend, adult film star Christy Mack, and her friend, leaving them with devastating injuries, broken bones, a shattered eye socket, and severe bruising. The brutality was so extreme it made headlines worldwide. Mack was left nearly unrecognizable, her face and body bearing the marks of unimaginable violence. The attack didn't just break bones, it broke lives. Koppenhaver fled the scene, but justice caught up with him swiftly. He was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, sexual assault, kidnapping, and assault with a deadly weapon among them. Prosecutors painted a chilling portrait of a man consumed by rage. The UFC acted without hesitation. War Machine was immediately cut from the roster, no appeals, no second chances. The organization made clear, violent criminal behavior outside the cage is intolerable, no matter the fighter's past achievement. This wasn't about losses or failed drug tests. This was about a line so dark and unforgivable that the MMA world could not look past it. Jonathan Koppenhaver was eventually convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His name, once linked to fierce battles and competitive spirit, is now forever tied to violence and tragedy. Matt Riddle, a true force in the UFC's welterweight division, with an explosive fighting style, slick grappling, and takedown defense that left opponents scratching their heads, Riddle was a rising star on a mission. On paper, his numbers were jaw-dropping. Ranked third all-time in UFC takedown defense, boasting an insane 89.3% success rate and 8th in total strikes landed, clocking in over 1,300 punches. The guy was on fire, rolling through a 5-fight win streak that had fans and analysts buzzing. But then the unexpected hit, not in the cage, but in the testing room. Twice caught with marijuana metabolites in his system, Riddle's promising UFC journey hit a major roadblock. Despite his undeniable skills and momentum, the UFC made a tough call. The repeated positive tests were a violation of the promotion's drug policies, and Matt Riddle was released. No warnings, no second chances. His official UFC record stood at 8 wins and 3 losses, but many believed he had the talent for much more. Fans were left asking, what if the rules were different? What if he'd been given more time to adjust? Thiago Silva, once a feared knockout artist and rising powerhouse in the UFC's light heavyweight division. By 2009, he was a name spoken quietly but with respect, as a serious contender knocking on the door of a title shot. But Silva's story wasn't just about power punches and takedowns inside the cage. Off the cage, a darker storm was brewing, one that would change everything. At UFC 125 in 2011, Silva dominated his fight, showing his trademark grit and skill. But after the fight, the Nevada State Athletic Commission made a shocking discovery. Silva's urine sample didn't match his blood sample. This wasn't just a failed drug test, it was suspected tampering, an attempt to evade detection of banned substances. Thiago Silva later admitted it was a terrible decision. The Nevada Commission overturned his win, suspended him for 1 year, and hit him with a $20,000 fine. For a fighter on the rise, it was a devastating setback. But Silva's troubles didn't end there. In 2014, Silva was arrested following an aggressive altercation involving his estranged wife and a Brazilian jiu-jitsu coach. Charged with serious offenses, the UFC acted swiftly, cutting ties immediately. Though those charges were later dropped due to insufficient evidence, the UFC surprisingly re-signed Silva. But just 2 weeks later, new disturbing evidence came to light. Faced with fresh allegations, the UFC released Thiago Silva once again, this time for good. The doors that once seemed wide open were firmly closed. Jennifer Gonzalez. Jennifer Gonzalez was a rising star lighting up the women's flyweight division. Riding a scorching 7-fight win streak, she was finally set to make her UFC debut on February 26, 2022, scheduled to face Josiane Nunes at UFC Vegas 49. But just days before stepping into the Octagon, everything took an unexpected turn. The UFC, in partnership with USADA, the organization responsible for enforcing anti-doping policies, flagged Gonzalez for violating the at-home drug testing protocols. Specifically, she was accused of evading a required test by not being present when the USADA tester arrived at her home. Gonzalez explained the incident as a simple misunderstanding. The USADA tester showed up unexpectedly, requesting she remain in sight while she parked and secured her 2 large Rottweilers. Agreeing to the request, Gonzalez asked for a few minutes to safely lock the dogs away. When she returned, the tester had already left the property. This mix-up left Gonzalez frustrated and emotionally drained. She insisted she had no intention of dodging the drug test. It was a matter of safety and communication, not avoidance. But the UFC's anti-doping policies are rigid and leave very little room for mistakes. The consequence? Despite her undefeated momentum and readiness to compete, Jennifer Gonzalez was cut from the UFC roster before she ever stepped into the cage. Renato Sobral. Renato Babalu Sobral was a dominant force in the light heavyweight division, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt whose iron will and well-rounded skill set made him a nightmare inside the cage. He made his UFC debut in 2006, quickly earning respect with his precise grappling, calculated strategy, and relentless pressure that left opponents scrambling. But Babalu's UFC run isn't just remembered for his skills, it's also defined by controversy that would cast a shadow over his legacy. At UFC 62, after a hard-fought victory over David Heath, Babalu showed the sportsmanship fans admired. Yet, less than a year later, everything changed. During his fight against David Terrell at UFC 74 in 2007, Babalu locked in a powerful rear naked choke. Terrell tapped, signaling submission, but Sobral held the choke too long, applying dangerous pressure well after the tap. Though Babalu insisted it was unintentional, The UFC and fans saw it as a serious breach of conduct. The Nevada State Athletic Commission fined and suspended him, and the UFC quickly released him from the promotion. That single moment of crossed boundaries overshadowed what could have been a long, celebrated UFC career, leaving fans to wonder, what if Babalu's passion hadn't crossed the line? Igor Severino. Igor Severino exploded onto the UFC scene as a young, undefeated Brazilian prospect. Known for his brutal striking and knockout power, the 20-year-old flyweight was seen as a rising star, fast, fearless, and hungry for glory. But what was supposed to be a breakout UFC debut turned into one of the most shocking moments in recent MMA history, and not for the reasons fans expected. Midway through the second round against fellow unbeaten Andre Lima, Severino snapped. In a jaw-dropping moment, he bit his opponent, sinking his teeth deep into Lima's arm. The bite was so blatant and undeniable, the referee immediately disqualified Severino. This wasn't a simple mistake or momentary lapse. It was a career-altering incident that instantly derailed what had looked like a meteoric rise. Afterwards, Severino admitted he didn't even remember the bite. He said he was on autopilot after taking a heavy shot, later watching the footage and confusing the bite for an elbow. From there, he said, he just didn't remember anything. To make things worse, many believed Severino was actually winning the fight before his bizarre outburst. What should have been a defining moment, instead became a notorious incident that overshadowed his raw talent. Dana White didn't hold back. If you get frustrated and want out of a fight, there are plenty of ways to do it, but biting? That's the worst thing you can do. The UFC's message was crystal clear. There's zero tolerance for that kind of conduct. Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz, the embodiment of relentless, no-holds-barred MMA. A fighter who brought intensity, heart, and a unique swagger to the Octagon that few could match. Diaz's style was unmistakable, a blend of slick boxing, Brazilian jiu-jitsu mastery, and mental warfare. He didn't just fight to win, he fought to break you down, both physically and mentally. Fans loved him for it. His candidness outside the cage, willingness to speak his mind, and refusal to conform made him one of the sport's most polarizing yet beloved figures. But in 2015, Diaz's career hit a sudden, harsh roadblock. After testing positive for marijuana metabolites following his fight at UFC 183, he was slapped with an unprecedented 5-year suspension by the Nevada Athletic Commission. The punishment was unprecedented and wildly disproportionate. Dana White called it insane and totally ridiculous. Many in the MMA community questioned why a substance increasingly accepted worldwide could end a fighter's career like this. The backlash was fierce. Fighters, fans, and analysts rallied behind Diaz, calling for reforms in how cannabis was treated in combat sports. Public pressure eventually led to a reduction of the ban to 18 months. But those lost years weren't just time off, they were prime years of a career sidelined. Diaz returned, still fiery and formidable, but the momentum he'd built was undeniably disrupted. Nick Diaz's story is about more than wins and losses. It's about fighting on his own terms, for respect for his fans, and for a place in a sport that wasn't always ready for someone like him. Wanderlei Silva, the axe murderer, was one of MMA's most ferocious warriors, rising to legendary status in Pride Fighting Championships. Silva's aggressive style and knockout power made him a nightmare for opponents, and a fan favorite worldwide. But Silva's career took a sharp turn in 2014, not inside the cage but outside it, where the rules of the sport's regulatory bodies would change his life forever. At UFC 175 weigh-ins, Silva refused a random drug test from the Nevada State Athletic Commission, a violation considered extremely serious in the world of MMA. The NSAC responded with the harshest punishment possible, a lifetime ban from competing in Nevada. This lifetime ban sent shockwaves through the MMA community. It effectively barred Silva from fighting in one of the sport's most important venues, the UFC's home base. Silva fought back hard, arguing that the testing process was flawed and that he never intentionally tried to avoid testing. After months of legal battles and appeals, the NSAC eventually overturned the lifetime ban, citing procedural errors in the testing process. But despite the win in court, Silva's relationship with the UFC was forever changed. The trust was broken. The once thriving contender was now a fighter sidelined by controversy. His career momentum stalled. Silva's story is not just about one refusal. It's about a fighter who embodied aggression and passion inside the octagon, but who faced one of the harshest battles of all, navigating a sport increasingly defined by regulation, scrutiny, and zero-tolerance policies. James Krause. In 2022, James Krause's career took a dramatic and devastating turn. Once celebrated as a skilled UFC fighter and respected coach, known for mentoring some of the sport's brightest talents, Krause found himself at the heart of one of the biggest scandals in MMA history. The trouble began when the UFC and several state athletic commissions launched a joint investigation into suspicious betting patterns surrounding fights connected to Krause's training camp. Multiple reports revealed irregular wagers placed on fights involving Krause's fighters, often with unusually timed, large bets that raised red flags across sportsbooks worldwide. The allegations went deeper. Insiders claimed Krause was providing information about fighter injuries, training issues, or fight strategies to gamblers, tipping the scales unfairly and threatening the very integrity of the sport. The UFC's response was swift and unequivocal. Not only was Krause suspended indefinitely, but the organization also implemented a sweeping ban, effectively blacklisting any fighter with ties to Krause from competing in the promotion. For Krause, this meant more than just a suspension. It was career suicide. The ban dismantled his role as a coach and trainer, severing ties with athletes and partners. For his fighters, many of whom were on the rise, their UFC dreams abruptly halted. This scandal exposed a dangerous vulnerability in MMA, the growing influence of gambling and the risks when inside information falls into the wrong hands. With millions wagered on UFC fights annually, the line between fair competition and corruption has never been thinner. Chael Sonnen. Chael Sonnen, the ultimate hype man of MMA. From his legendary rivalries with Anderson Silva to his relentless promos, Sonnen built a reputation as the sport's best talker, a fighter who sold every bout like it was the main event. But his career wasn't just built on words and wins. It was shadowed by mistakes that would unravel everything. Between 2010 and 2014, Sonnen faced multiple setbacks as he tested positive for banned performance-enhancing drugs, specifically human growth hormone and erythropoietin. These substances are designed to increase muscle mass, improve endurance, and accelerate recovery, giving him an unfair advantage inside the cage. After his epic title fight against Anderson Silva at UFC 148 in 2012, a fight Sonnen nearly won, the Nevada State Athletic Commission began scrutinizing his drug tests. A failed test for human growth hormone followed, but Sonnen continued fighting until 2014, when another positive for erythropoietin sealed his fate. The Nevada Commission handed Sonnen a 2-year suspension, one of the harshest punishments in UFC history. This ban stripped him of his ability to compete at the highest level, sidelining him during what could have been the peak years of his career. Despite his charisma and fight IQ, Sonnen's legacy is forever marked by these violations. The substances may have enhanced his physical capabilities, but they damaged his reputation and ultimately ended his UFC tenure. Darrick Minner. Darrick the Spider Minner was known for his relentless pressure and unbreakable heart inside the featherweight cage. But behind the scenes, whispers began swirling, suspicious betting activity linked to some of his fights. Sharp eyes in the betting world noticed unusual, high-stakes wagers placed just before several of Minner's bouts, often on unexpected outcomes that left fans and officials uneasy. Investigations revealed troubling connections. Minner was tied to individuals involved in illegal betting rings, raising serious questions about his role. Was Minner manipulating fight results, or simply entangled with the wrong crowd? The Nevada Athletic Commission launched a thorough investigation. The UFC acted swiftly, suspending Minner pending a full review. The fallout was harsh. Minner's reputation took a severe hit, trust from fans and promoters eroded, and his fighting career hung precariously in the balance. In a sport built on honor, allegations like these are devastating. Jeff Molina. Jeff Molina was a promising young talent in the UFC's flyweight division, fast, skilled, and destined for greatness. But his rising trajectory was abruptly derailed by his own involvement in gambling controversies. Molina was suspended indefinitely after an investigation revealed he had placed bets on UFC fights, including his own. This is a direct violation of Athletic Commission rules and UFC policies designed to protect the sport's integrity. The Commission's findings were stark. Molina's betting behavior raised alarm bells about potential conflicts of interest and the even darker possibility of fight fixing. The UFC didn't hesitate. Molina was released from his contract, a clear warning to the entire MMA community. The bigger picture. These scandals involving Minner and Molina expose a dangerous crossroad where MMA and gambling collide, threatening to unravel decades of hard-earned respect for the sport. Since then, the UFC has strengthened its policies, partnering closely with athletic commissions and law enforcement to root out betting corruption before it takes hold. For fans, these incidents are a harsh reminder. The drama and thrill inside the Octagon can never be fully trusted if the shadow of gambling scandals looms behind the scenes. In the UFC, the fight doesn't always end when the final horn sounds. For these fighters, their biggest battles weren't in the cage. They were against the system, against the rules, and sometimes against themselves. Some came back, some never did, but all of them remind us, one decision can change everything. Which ban shocked you the most? Daly's lifetime exile, Nick Diaz's 5-year weed suspension, or the scandal that ended James Krause's career? Let's talk about it in the comments, and if you want more jaw-dropping stories from the fight game, check out the next video on the channel. Because in the UFC, history isn't just made in the Octagon. Sometimes it's destroyed there